You're listening to The Hook. We talk about marketing and branding, and, well, we bring people on that Jason knows very well a lot of times because it seems like you know everybody, dude.
Well, hey, it's part of building a professional network is surrounding yourself with amazing people. And we've been teasing you guys a little bit about our guest today. His name is Russell Granger. A little bit about his background real quick. He spent time on the brand strategy side, similar to me, in marketing and advertising. And he was actually leading brand strategy engagements for IBM Global Services for companies like Samsonite, Newell Rubbermaid, KeyBank, and has just had a broad background in this industry and has now partnered with, I guess some time ago, with his father's study on neuroscience and the just different triggers that we were talking about. And so before I bash it and mess it all up, I'm going to bring Russell on now. Russell, thank you so much for coming on the show.
Hey, it's my pleasure, Jason. Glad to be here.
Awesome. So, we were talking before a little bit about how you had this marketing background and your father did this neuroscience study and how you guys have kind of combined. And so before we get into the science, I want to ask you a little bit about what was it like combining businesses with your father? That's kind of a unique dynamic there.
It is a little bit. My dad was something of a serial entrepreneur. He came out of corporate America. He was given a full scholarship and felt honor bound to work for the company that provided him that scholarship, even though he was under no obligation to do so. So he did spend some time in corporate America. And although he wasn't thrilled about a lot of what people, particularly small business and entrepreneurial types, don't tend to like about corporate America, he learned a lot. But he was much more of a serial entrepreneur type. So in that sense, we were very similar. And I did work for a number of his companies throughout the years, and especially when I was younger and out of school and stuff. So, I got to say, it sounds like a cliche, but he really was my mentor as well as my dad. And we sort of had a lot of synergy helping each other's businesses over the years. The notion of combining them was something that I kind of had a vision about pretty early on. I was kind of early into the whole digital channel or,
right.
Kind of internet media thing and developed companies very early on that got quite a lot of traction in a lot of different ways, working with a lot of different industries. And I kind of saw what I kind of think of now as the digital writing on the wall, as it were, about the migration of business learning and training into the digital channel. In other words, creating learning and training in sort of the online course kind of way. So I sort of had this expectation that I was going to ultimately loop back around to my dad's business, which ultimately became about corporate training, sales, leadership, management, customer service, things of that nature. He had, as I said, he'd been in corporate America and he had built many different businesses. So he had developed a certain level of expertise around this and frankly always had a kind of a fascination based, I guess, in part due to his training of education in psychology and things of that nature, was always really interested in human behavior and what constituted success and what made people and organizations successful. So that was part of it. The other synergy was that although his focus tended to be around sales and kind of relationship building with customers and with colleagues and different markets, mine was on, similar to yours, Jason, on brand and marketing. So putting together the sort of the brand, marketing, and sales components it really kind of added up. I mean, that wasn't, it's not too much of a stretch to kind of put those three things together. So that was kind of obvious as well. And then finally, when he wrote in 2008 the 7 Triggers to Yes, which was really about this kind of emerging neuroscience around influence and persuasion and the ability that we now have to understand what exactly is going on in the brain when people are, doing things like making decisions and particularly buying decisions. That really became sort of the glue or the mortar, if you will, between the bricks of our different businesses, right?
Yeah.
Because that kind of underlies the notion of persuasion and influence really kind of underlies all three of those really critical components of any business: the brand, the marketing, and the sales.
Yeah, it's powerful stuff. And we've been talking a little bit about that. And so these two, you guys have combined these companies. It's now Rising Tide Partners, correct?
Mm-hmm, correct.
Okay. And if anybody wants to reach out and get in touch with you, what's the best way for them to do that?
They can go to risingtidepartners.com.
Okay, Rising Tide Parker. So tell us a little bit more about Seven Triggers to Yes. This is a book, and I guess this is based on that original study that your father did, and you've kind of recrafted it here lately, though, haven't you? Isn't there a 2.0 version out there?
Yeah, well, there's a bunch of different versions. I mean, or rather, I should say, there's a bunch of different permutations, if you will, of the original book. We've got courses and audio books and Kindle books and different online training courses and stuff, all of which have been based on kind of the original material that my dad developed back in 2008. And I think, in a lot of ways, he was ahead of his time. When my agency first started helping him promote the original book and market the book online, it was actually kind of difficult to find a lot of columns or blog posts or different kinds of resources to curate in that kind of that social media way to sort of build a kind of a topic so that people could follow this. It was really kind of challenging. And we're only talking about, 7 years ago or so. Now, this has become such a hot topic that, you can't swing a cat without, or should I say an internet cat video, without hitting somebody who's talking about the implications of neuroscience on business, and particularly around emotional intelligence and emotional triggers, and how critical we've come to understand that the emotional brain is to marketing and selling.
Yeah.
So that's what we've kind of been building the business around, is because it's such a broad topic and it has such powerful implications across all of business. That it really can create and provide a foundation for consulting and training in a bunch of different important areas.
Absolutely. So obviously we have a lot of small business owners, entrepreneurs listening to the show, marketing folks. What are some things that you guys discovered that can help them run their business or be more effective in what they're doing in a kind of a more practical way?
Sure. So, what's important to understand is that what neuroscience discovered by being able to observe live brain scans. And that only started really kind of in the early to mid-90s, is when live brain scans were really even technologically possible. And over the course of the ensuing probably decade or so, scientists really started to figure out how to be able to analyze human activity using live brain scans. And some of those activities that they looked at were things like, what's happening in the brain when people are actually making decisions about things, including buying decisions. So, and what neuroscience ultimately revealed, specifically about influence and persuasion and selling and marketing, is basically that we've been trying to persuade people in precisely the wrong way.
Nice. Okay.
For at least the last couple of thousand years, since Aristotle famously said that the most effective route to persuasion was through logic and reason.
Right.
So the surprise that neuroscience revealed was really in the enormous power of the emotional brain in human decision making, and that meaning that the emotional parts of the brain essentially control everything.
Right.
We think we're making logical and rational decisions, but really we're making emotional decisions and then justifying them with logic and reason.
Right.
So
right. I think you said it great that one time. You were saying that we used to think that we were logical minds that had emotion, but in fact it's the exact opposite, right? We're emotional minds that.
Right, exactly. So one of the scientists that my dad quotes quite often in the book is a man by the name of Dr. Richard Restak, and he was the one who was responsible for the great PBS series called The Secret Life of the Brain. So Richard Restak was ultimately famous for saying that we are not thinking machines who feel. We are feeling machines that think.
Yeah.
And it makes a big difference, Jason, and particularly and especially for small businesses and entrepreneurs who kind of have to run across all of the dimensions of brand and marketing and sales. You and I have talked about this. It's actually harder in many ways in large corporations because those kind of business divisions, those categories of business operations are sometimes so siloed that they lose the connections that happen between them.
Mm-hmm.
Right?
Yeah, they're kind of
Whereas
covered in
small
formalities, you know.
yeah, absolutely. And so, small business owners and entrepreneurs have at least one advantage in that regard, that they can kind of, look at brand and marketing and sales in a much more synergistic and connected way.
Absolutely.
But so here's the thing that we learn about the importance, or that we can put to use about our understanding of the importance of the emotional brain, is that if in our marketing and selling we fail to connect with the emotional brain, if we don't appeal to the parts of the brain that actually control decisions, we're just not being as effective as we could be. And worse, we could actually be encouraging no decisions rather than encouraging yes decisions.
Right.
So, and what we're doing when we, kind of bombard our prospects and customers with facts and features, and even benefits, quite frankly. I mean, there's plenty of folks that know that it's not ultimately about facts and features. It's about benefits. But there's also lots of benefits that are not necessarily emotionally driven. And if we're bombarding our prospect with facts and features and even benefits that are not emotionally driven, what we're doing is we're requiring that they do all the work of either making an analytical decision, which the brain does not like to do, or by making the emotional connections, the emotional interpretations themselves, which most customers won't do. So think about it this way, and this is a question we ask in our 7 Triggers workshops all the time. Why do people hate to be sold but love to buy?
Right.
I mean, and everybody knows, right? We love to buy things, but we hate to be sold. Right. Well, the reason is because when people are in a buying mode, they are creating their own emotional connections. They're activating their own emotional triggers when considering purchases. Buying is literally emotionally gratifying, right?
Wow.
Selling, on the other hand, right? Selling, on the other hand, because it tends to focus on facts and features, is inherently analytical. And so the average salesperson, and frankly, most marketing messages, are not connecting with or activating the emotional brain.
Right. So it's almost like you're putting them on their heels, having to work harder for something that they emotionally already had a connection or desire for.
Absolutely right.
Yeah.
Absolutely right.
Well, we're talking with Russell Granger. You're alluding to the 7 triggers, and we're going to have to take a break here in a minute. But when we come back, I want to unravel those 7 triggers with you for the listeners, if you can.
Let's do it.
All right.
Got Russ Granger on the line, along with the marketing maverick. That's Jason Arsmont. We'll be right back on The Hook. You're listening to The Hook, along with Jason Arsmont. That's the marketing maverick. We got Russell Granger on the line with us. Something that I find very interesting is what you just talked about a while ago. By the way, you can reach us at thehookradio.com. Something that you said was that we like to buy, but we don't like to be sold. And boy, that hits home. I mean, how many times have we gone somewhere like looking at a car? This is my recent thing. Looking at a car, and you go out to the lot and you want to look at it and you have a lot of questions, but you don't want to talk to a salesperson sometimes. A lot of times.
Yeah. Or you wouldn't mind maybe talking to him if he spoke to what it was that you're really there looking for. And, obviously what we're learning here is that you're looking for an emotional connection rather than maybe a logical one.
Yeah.
So we talked about, with Russell Granger here, we're talking about the 7 triggers that came from a neurological study that his father had done that has been passed down to him, and they formed a company that is now focusing on this through all types of corporate training. And I'm itching to dive into these and give the listeners an idea of what these 7 triggers really are. What does that mean when we say 7 triggers?
Right. So let's talk just for a second before we break it down into the individual triggers. Let's talk for a second just about what emotional triggers are. It's important to understand what emotional triggers actually are. What do we mean when we say emotional triggers? So emotional triggers are essentially what we think of as decision shortcuts. Okay, so the brain that we know now from neuroscience is constantly seeking to conserve energy. It's not looking to expend energy. It's looking to conserve energy. And analytical thinking requires a ton of energy. Okay? So messages, communications, anything that we're doing relative to, brand and marketing and sales which can be easily processed in the emotional brain, are strongly preferred, right? And lead more directly and more quickly, and in fact, much more strongly, to decisions, and particularly the kinds of decisions that we want, which are yes decisions. We can all use a little more yes in our life, right? So the emotional triggers are the sort of the categories or the prompts, if you will, and they fall into a number of different categories. And different organizations who've sort of done the research on this and who brought the learnings of neuroscience to the business marketplace have different ranges of triggers. There aren't just 7, quite frankly. But what we've done with the 7 triggers is we've identified those that we believe are the critical ones, the ones that are really going to make the difference for busy business people who don't want to have to spend, half their lives in academic research in neuroscience.
Wow, right.
To understand, how can I make this stuff work for my business?
Yeah.
Okay. So that's why we have those 7.
Yeah.
But in fact, if they're used properly, Jason, really and truly, they can lead to almost irresistible decisions. One of my favorite examples of this, of how powerful emotional triggers can be in driving irresistible decisions is actually the story of my own business partner, Kathy Coppins, who, by the way, happens to be the much more analytical, operational, data-driven half of our business, right?
Wow.
And
if you can imagine.
Yeah, exactly. Who also knows, by the way, naturally, the 7 triggers backwards and forwards. So Kathy was attending this webinar about how to develop leads on LinkedIn, okay? So now you got to know that Kathy's already one of the strongest LinkedIn experts I've ever seen. So there couldn't have been a huge amount in this webinar that she didn't know about. But she's on this webinar, and I'm on a train coming back from meetings, and she's texting me. And she's commenting on how effectively the webinar facilitator is using each of the triggers. And she's literally like checking the boxes, counting them down as he's going through them. And she's like, yep, there's the reciprocity trigger. Oh, he's really got a whole bunch of contrast triggers. And I can see her going through and kind of identifying what he's doing. And she's very impressed because he really knows what he's doing, and it's very powerful. And I can tell as she's texting me that she's getting completely sucked in to wanting to buy right, this $1,000 course about using LinkedIn. Something that she already knows how to do, mind you.
But they're going through the process of hitting the emotional triggers, and she's feeling compelled.
Absolutely. And the crazy thing is, Jason, and this is how powerful this stuff is, she knows what's happening. In other words, she's well trained in emotional triggers. And yet, because we're talking about the biology of the brain, there's even though she knows what's happening as it's happening, she's unable to resist it. So she's literally texting me, I really think we need this. This would be a great course for us, on and on and on. And I can just tell she's getting sucked in. So finally, like all great sales presentations, they wind up with the reason why trigger. Now, the reason why trigger is the sort of, and typically it's the final thing at the end of a sales pitch. And, the most common examples are, there's a discount today. Or, get it before the price goes up. Things like that. That's a reason why trigger. Pretty simple stuff. Which, by the way, just as a quick aside, the thing about emotional triggers is that there's nothing new about them, right? It's human nature, right? It's human biology.
But it's almost like you guys have been able to help define what some people have called before, that guy's just a natural at sales, or he's a natural communicator. I know I found some of those own attributes myself in having success in the past, but then, reading your book and understanding these allowed me to have a little bit more confidence and empowerment when I go into a pitch or I go into a conversation or negotiation. It's been unbelievable reading and kind of diving into this whole world.
Well, and I'll tell you, Jason, similar to that, the most common experience that we've had in bringing this methodology, bringing this training to a wide variety of different industries and organizations, is that in every single case, the folks that respond to this the most are the seasoned salespeople and the most successful salespeople.
Right.
Why? Because they recognize it.
Mm-hmm.
They may not have had a vocabulary to talk about it. They may not have understood the scientific underpinnings that make it work, but they know that this is what works, and they're thrilled to have a vocabulary and to have the science behind it to understand not only how it works, but how to make it work more consistently.
Yeah, I think it's an unbelievable resource. We're talking with Russell Granger. We're talking about the 7 triggers, these emotional triggers that help convert your pitch or your communication to a yes, to an answer from the recipient. You've got a book out there. I know folks can go to Amazon, but what I'm going to go ahead and do, I'm such a believer in this thing, I want to give a few of these things away. So if you're listening to the show right now, if you go to thehookradio.com, fill out the form. I'll give the first 5 people that go to the site, fill out the form, comes to me, I'll email you back with the receipt saying that you got a book coming your way. I'm a big believer in this book. I'm a big believer in the science behind it, and the way that Russell has been able to organize this and present it is something that, even if you're not in sales, communication, management, probably marriage to some extent, right? I mean, any type of communication, I just see a pattern here on what you're doing and the way that you're able to present it. And you've also got kind of a timeline, right? I mean, you even identified like the order in which these triggers should be hit.
Yeah, and I mean, and you mentioned all of the interpersonal relationship sort of dimensions that this works in. But the other thing to remember, Jason, is that it can be extremely powerful, even for creating marketing communication.
Right.
Because
too,
I mean, the other common experience that we so often have when we bring this into organizations is we very often start with the sales organization. And then, almost inevitably, and I would say probably 7 out of 10 cases, we wind up bringing it. They wind up wanting to then have us bring it to either leadership or marketing or both.
Right.
And again, the reason is because when you're talking about look, the marketing and even selling and certain aspects of say developing teams or leadership and stuff, is all very kind of, at least traditionally, has all been very process-driven. And there's nothing wrong with having a solid model or a solid process. But until now, we've never really understood how, for example, you get customers through a customer life cycle, right? So you're looking at a sales model that says, okay, establish rapport, conduct a needs profile, develop a presentation that says, that meets their needs and that says, here's what you said you wanted, and then here's some, objection handling skills and some closing skills. All really important, really good stuff. But it's very process-driven. It's like how to get, what sort of steps in the process you want to get people from and to. And frankly, it's the same with marketing. There's a lot of, kind of constructs and channels and plans that you want to put together. But until we had the real science that told us why people actually make decisions to either click on a banner ad or engage with a landing page or contact a company or decide to make a purchase, until we had the science that told us why people are actually doing that and what's motivating them to do that, we didn't understand how to get people from one point in the customer life cycle to the next.
Yeah.
Now we know.
Yeah.
Now we know. Now we've got a formula that can help us do it. And yes, there is a sort of a certain timeline, as you called it, or a process. The 7 triggers is more of a formula than a process, but there is a sort of a strategic approach that you can take with these 7 triggers that can sort of help you conduct a customer again through that life cycle. So you form a foundation of, say, and just so we get it on the record, right? So what are the 7 triggers? 7 triggers are friendship, authority, contrast, reason why, reciprocity, consistency, and hope.
Wow. Yeah.
All right. So,
and you can go back and listen to those at thehookradio.com in case you missed all those. One other thing I wanted to bring up, too. I know a couple months back, given that we're kind of in the political landscape right now with everything going on, you wrote an article for Business Insider talking about kind of to the manner of how Donald Trump's been so effective. Fill us in a little bit on that. I think the listeners will love to hear that.
Well, what's been fascinating, about watching what's been happening with the Trump campaign, and you just see it over and over again. The one sort of, I guess, example that I'm reminded of, or that reminds me the most of how powerful his emotional connection with his constituents, how effective that is, when he said a while ago, I could stand on, Fifth Avenue and shoot somebody and no one would stop, my supporters would still support me. Take that for what it's worth in terms of your opinion about how, appropriate that is for,
right.
for a presidential candidate.
That aside,
leaving that aside, there is nothing logical about that. There's nothing more exemplary of an emotional reason, an emotional connection to a candidate,
and
than that example. And so, just quickly, what Trump he fires on all. I mean, he really activates all of the emotional triggers in one way or the other. But two of them that I'm always reminded of is it's difficult, particularly especially for political candidates, to combine the friendship trigger and the authority trigger. It's difficult to do, and the reason is because if you activate the friendship trigger, you're seen, kind of as one of us. And in that sense, you can sort of fire off some authority trigger things, but typically, it's kind of one or the other. Clinton, for example, does not activate any friendship triggers whatsoever.
Right.
She activates a lot of authority triggers for a lot of people. Everybody gets the fact that she's got the experience, but she just doesn't connect with people, at that kind of like she's like me kind of way, or she just has not been able to do that. Trump has this unbelievable ability to have very, very high activity on the authority trigger dimension because of the business successes he's had and his name on top of buildings and all that kind of stuff. And yet, simultaneously he talks like people, like working class people across the country talk at the dinner table, right? So there's this odd mix of both incredible authority and incredible sameness or friendship trigger activation. And that in addition to a lot of other ones. But, his appeal is almost entirely emotional. It has nothing to do with logic and reason.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. Folks, we're listening to Russell Granger. I hope that you're getting all of this. This is the tip of the iceberg. 7 Triggers to Yes is the book. Go to my website, thehookradio.com, fill out the form. I'll get you a free copy for the first 5 people. We're looking at these neuroscience study that covers really just a scientific portion of what persuasion and influence really is and how to get that across. Russell, I know, like I said, we touched the tip of the iceberg here. I want to check your schedule. I'd love to have you back on. I'm sure we're going to get tons of emails on this, but we are wrapping up the show, unfortunately, and so I want to thank you so much for coming on and sharing what you've got with us.
Hey, it's my pleasure, Jason. I love your show. You guys are doing great work for your constituents as well. So keep it going.
And if you missed any of this, you can always check the full interview at thehookradio.com. It's Jason Arsenault, the Marketing Maverick. We'll be back again next week on The Hook.